God says this message is reaching you at the exact moment your spirit is ready to receive what you once thought was impossible. God says there is something happening around you that your physical eyes cannot see yet, but your soul has been feeling it for weeks. There is a divine shift, a sacred turning, an invisible door opening, and you may not realize how close you are to the blessing that has been prepared in silence. God says you have walked through storms that were never meant to destroy you but to prepare you for the magnitude of what is being released into your life right now. God says this is not a joke, not a coincidence, not an accident. This is alignment. This is timing. This is the moment where everything that was delayed finally starts moving in your direction. God says the reason you have felt tired recently is not because you are failing, it is because your spirit has been adjusting to the weight of the blessing coming toward you. Miracles carry their own energy, and when a miracle is close, the soul vibrates differently. That heaviness you felt last week was not sadness, it was transformation. That restlessness at night was not anxiety, it was elevation. God says your spirit has been stretching, awakening, expanding, preparing to hold something bigger than anything you have ever imagined. God says the miracle you are stepping into has the power to rewrite your story. It has the power to make you understand why everything else had to fall apart first. It has the power to make you say, "Now I see why it took so long." God says you are stepping into a season where your blessings will arrive so quickly, so consistently, that even the people who doubted you will be shocked by how God moves for you. They will wonder how someone who walked through so much pain could suddenly shine so brightly. They will wonder how someone who faced so many delays could suddenly rise so effortlessly. God says the answer is simple, because you stayed faithful. Because you kept praying. Because you kept believing, even when you were tired of believing. God says your name has been spoken in places you have never been. Angels have been sent ahead of you to prepare opportunities that your hands have not touched yet. God says something huge is moving in the spiritual realm, something your heart has secretly prayed for but didn't dare to expect so soon. God says your breakthrough is not coming slowly, it is coming suddenly, and the suddenness will surprise you. God says the blessing being released into your life is not small. It is not average. It is not ordinary. It is a blessing that carries weight, purpose, and divine favor. God says you have worried long enough about resources. You have stressed long enough about lack. You have cried long enough about things that were beyond your control. God says a wave of abundance, peace, and divine provision is approaching your life like a quiet sunrise. You will not have to chase it. You will not have to beg for it. You will not have to fear losing it. God says what is meant for you will not slip away. What belongs to you will not be taken. What you are being prepared for is protected in heaven, sealed with God's promise. God says the reason you are receiving this message now is because your spirit has reached the point where it can no longer be denied what heaven is releasing. God says you spent too long fighting battles you never told anyone about. You carried burdens that were heavier than anyone realized. You endured seasons of silence where nothing made sense. But heaven was listening. Heaven was watching. Heaven was preparing. God says you were never alone, not even for 1 second. Every tear was counted. Every prayer was heard. Every moment of confusion was recorded. Nothing you went through was wasted. God says the spiritual abundance being poured into your life is greater than anything you ever lost. For every disappointment, God is sending restoration. For every betrayal, God is sending alignment. For every closed door, God is sending a divine opening that no human can block. God says you are stepping into a season where the things that used to stress you will no longer affect you. Your spirit is rising above old pain, old fears, old limitations. God says you are walking into a higher level of grace, a higher level of clarity, a higher level of divine protection. God says your heart is about to feel lighter than it has felt in years. Your mind is about to find peace where there used to be worry. Your path is about to clear where there used to be confusion. God says the energy surrounding your life is shifting in your favor. Doors that were closed are beginning to unlock. People who once ignored you will suddenly recognize your value. Opportunities that felt distant will appear effortlessly. God says your life is about to reflect the prayers you prayed when no one else was listening. God says the spiritual wealth coming toward you is not just about earthly resources. It is about peace, freedom, stability, joy, and inner elevation. God says the abundance being released into your life will touch every area: your mind, your relationships, your emotional well-being, your sense of purpose, your connection with God. God says this abundance will heal parts of you that you didn't even realize were wounded. It will restore faith you didn't know you had lost. It will strengthen you in ways you didn't know you needed. God says your spirit is entering a season where closed chapters no longer hurt. Where old memories no longer have power. Where past mistakes no longer hold you back. God says you are rising, and nothing can stop what heaven is orchestrating. Your path is being cleared. Your destiny is being shaped. Your blessings are being positioned around you. God says everything is aligning, even the things that look uncertain right now. God says the reason this message feels urgent is because heaven is moving quickly. The shift is not slow. It is not gradual. It is immediate. God says the spiritual deposit being released into your life is massive, powerful, and transformative. Your soul will feel the difference. Your days will feel different. Your energy will feel different. God says the heaviness that once clung to your life is being lifted right now. The doubt that once clouded your mind is evaporating. The fear that once limited you is dissolving. God says you are safe. You are protected. You are guided. Everything that is meant for you is coming with precision. God says your story is changing. Your atmosphere is changing. Your destiny is changing. The spiritual abundance flowing toward you is not temporary, it is long-lasting. God says this blessing will not fade, will not be stolen, will not be interrupted. It is sealed. It is secured. It is divinely protected. God says your part is simple: trust. Pray. Stay aligned. Stay open. Do not walk in fear. Do not doubt what your spirit is feeling. Do not ignore the signs that heaven is sending you. God says your breakthrough has already begun. God says you are stepping into an extraordinary chapter, one filled with clarity, abundance, miracles, and divine timing. God says the spiritual doors opening now were closed for years because the moment was not right. But now the moment has arrived. God says you are ready. Your spirit is ready. Your life is ready. Nothing will go wrong because God is holding every step, every breath, every detail. God says you are safe. You are protected. You are guided. You are loved. God says this message is your confirmation. Heaven is moving. Blessings are flowing. Miracles are unfolding. Trust it. Receive it. Walk into it with faith. God says this is an urgent message meant only for your spirit in this very moment, a moment that was written long before your birth, a moment heaven has prepared for you because today something unbelievable has happened in the realm of your destiny. God says that what you are about to hear is not a coincidence, not imagination, not wishful thinking, but a divine revelation unfolding precisely when you need it the most. God says your name has been whispered across the heavens today, and something has been released in your favor that is far bigger than anything you have ever imagined. God says He has seen your struggles, your tears, your silent questions, your endless nights where you wondered if anyone, even heaven, truly understood the weight you've been carrying. But today, God says the weight on your shoulders has not gone unnoticed, and because of that, something unbelievable has been birthed in the spiritual realm, something that has now reached the physical world. And it carries your name on it. God says your bank executive is stunned because something impossible has happened, something that defies human understanding, something that cannot be explained by earthly logic or financial systems. A secret miracle money worth trillions has just been deposited in your name. God says this miracle was written for you before time began. It has traveled through prayers, tears, battles, setbacks, betrayals, and storms you didn't think you would ever survive. God says this miraculous deposit is not just financial. It is spiritual wealth, emotional wealth, generational wealth, destiny wealth. He says that this is your breakthrough, your divine elevation, your supernatural restoration. God says this is the sign you prayed for and the evidence that heaven has not forgotten you. God says what has been placed in your name has shocked the very people who once doubted that you would ever rise. God says the angels assigned to you have already recorded the miracle, already sealed it, already confirmed it. God says the moment this miracle was released, a divine alarm went off in the spirit. The enemy panicked. Darkness trembled. Heaven celebrated. Because the moment this miracle reached your name, the atmosphere around your life changed permanently. God says this miracle money is not ordinary, it carries divine purpose. It carries your future in its wings. It carries your freedom, your peace, your restoration, your rise. God says this is the type of miracle that turns the page of your destiny, the type of miracle that silences every voice that ever doubted you, every person who underestimated you, every situation that tried to break you. God says open this message immediately, because if you delay, fear may try to whisper lies into your spirit. God says fear is the thief of miracles, and this miracle cannot be allowed to slip away from your hands. God says you will not lose it, you will not be cheated, you will not be robbed, you will not be tricked out of what heaven has placed in your name. But you must not ignore this moment. God says timing is everything in the spirit. When heaven opens a window, you must step into it. When heaven sends a message, you must respond. God says this message is the confirmation that your life is shifting faster than you realize. God says angels have been standing around your household since last night. They have been watching, protecting, guarding, making sure that the enemy does not interfere with what is being delivered into your life. God says nothing will go wrong with you because you are under divine surveillance, divine protection, divine guidance. God says the forces that once attacked you are now powerless in front of the glory surrounding you. God says He has covered you in light, and no darkness can penetrate what has been sealed for your rise. God says He knows you sometimes doubt yourself. He knows you sometimes feel unworthy. He knows you sometimes wonder how breakthroughs can happen for someone like you after everything you have faced. But God says you must stop underestimating the power of heaven, because heaven does not bless based on who people think you are. Heaven blesses based on who God knows you are. And God says He knows your heart, your pain, your faith, your sacrifice, and your value. God says He knows that every time you cried alone, every time you felt forgotten, every time you felt invisible, heaven was watching and preparing. God says this deposit of miracle money is a symbol of everything that is about to unfold. God says financial miracles are only the beginning. He says relationships are being healed. Opportunities are being opened. Doors that were locked for years are cracking open. People who ignored you will seek you. The things you lost are returning. The things taken from you unfairly are coming back. God says this miracle money is the first sign of the era you are stepping into, an era of abundance, stability, peace, and victory. God says your bank executive is shocked because they have never seen something like this happen before. God says this shock is only a shadow of the shock your enemies will feel when they see you rise. God says many people thought you would remain stuck. Many thought you would break. Many thought you would live your life in silence, struggle, sorrow. But God says they were wrong. God says He has chosen this moment to elevate you because your spirit is finally ready to receive what He always intended for you. God says He trusts you with abundance because He has watched you survive drought. He trusts you with overflow because He witnessed you remain kind even in lack. God says you never let your heart turn cold even when people hurt you deeply. You never wished destruction on anyone even when they abandoned you, betrayed you, or took advantage of your goodness. God says your kindness did not go unnoticed. Your patience did not go unnoticed. Your quiet endurance did not go unnoticed. God says today heaven rewards you for everything that tried to break you but failed. God says this message is not random. He says you were guided to it because your soul needed to hear the truth at this exact second. God says you have reached the turning point of your destiny. He says the miracle money is not just a blessing. It is a signal that heaven has shifted your entire life into a new timeline. God says from today forward, blessings will flow easier, opportunities will appear sharper, and divine protection will surround you stronger. God says you are safe. God says you are protected. God says He will not let anything go wrong with you. God says even the battles you do not see are already being won on your behalf. He says angels have gone ahead of you into the week, into the month, into the year, preparing miracles, protection, breakthroughs, and solutions. God says nothing formed against you will stand, and nothing meant to harm you can reach you now. God says trust Him. Trust Him even when you do not understand what is happening. Trust Him even when it feels too. God says this message is being delivered to you in a moment when the spiritual realm is shaking with movement, because something extraordinary has just taken place with your name written on it. God says your bank executive is stunned, unable to comprehend how suddenly an account that once looked ordinary has become a vessel of unimaginable abundance. Heaven has released something that does not follow the logic of the world. A secret miracle money, worth more than you ever dreamed, has been deposited in your name, and right now the entire spiritual atmosphere around you is vibrating because this miracle was not random, it was divinely timed. God says, open this message immediately, because when heaven releases something of this magnitude, the enemy tries to distract, delay, or pull you away from it. God says you must understand that when a blessing of this size comes, there is a window, an appointed moment, when your spirit must be awake, alert, and ready. God says you have lived so much of your life thinking blessings were always for other people, that you were destined to struggle longer than others, that somehow things would come late for you. But God says this time is different. This time something has shifted in the unseen. This time heaven has placed you at the center of an unfolding miracle that no one can interfere with. God says your name was announced before the hosts of heaven, and the angels were released with instructions sealed with divine authority. God says, they carried something that was meant only for you, something locked with your spiritual signature, and that miracle money is not symbolic, not metaphorical. It is a real manifestation of abundance placed into your life because God has decided that your drought is over. God says your bank executive is stunned because the numbers in your name do not align with your earthly income, but they align perfectly with your heavenly inheritance. God says when He moves, the world stares. When He elevates you, the world whispers. When He performs a miracle so shocking that even financial systems react, it is not because you earned it by human effort, it is because God has declared a season change over you. God says you have cried, you have waited, you have prayed in silence when no one knew the pressure you were under. You have walked through days where your faith was the only thing keeping you from collapsing. Heaven saw it. Heaven recorded it. Heaven responded to it. God says this urgent message is being delivered because if you delay, you risk missing the spiritual connection point where heaven aligns with earth. God says people often lose blessings not because God didn't give them, but because they did not awaken at the moment the blessing arrived. God says He does not want that for you. He says you must know, right now, that nothing will go wrong with you, that you are safe, that divine protection surrounds you like a shield. God says He has assigned angels to guard the miracle released into your name, but you must receive this message in your heart, in your spirit, with complete trust. God says trust Him more than you trust your logic, your fear, or your past disappointments. God says the trillions deposited in your name represent not just money but restoration. Restoration of every moment you felt neglected. Restoration of every dream that dried up before it could bloom. Restoration of the years that were stolen by stress, delays, betrayal, and closed doors. God says the miracle was deposited because heaven has calculated everything that was taken from you, everything that was delayed, and everything that was denied. God says, now I repay. Now I restore. Now I overflow. God says this miracle money is not random, it is divine compensation for the silent suffering no one knew you carried. God says the reason this miracle is urgent is because the spiritual realm is open in your favor right now. God says there is a window in which your faith has incredible power, where your belief becomes the key that keeps this miracle locked into your life. God says the enemy has tried to steal your confidence over the years. Every disappointment, every sudden setback, every person who walked away without explanation, these were attacks on your spirit, attempts to make you believe that you were forgotten. But God says He never forgot you. Not for a moment. He saw everything. He counted every tear. He heard every prayer you whispered into the darkness when you thought no one was listening. God says the reason your blessing is so big is because the battle you survived was so heavy. God says you did not break under pressure. Even when you thought you were close. You kept pushing, you kept believing, even if your faith felt fragile. God says fragile faith still reaches heaven when the heart is sincere. God says He saw you hold on to hope when life gave you no reason to hope. And He says, for that, I reward you. For that, I elevate you. For that, I pour out blessings you never imagined. God says this miracle money will not slip away from you, but you must remain spiritually aligned. God says to trust Him fully, because fear blocks blessings but trust attracts them. God says nothing will go wrong with you. The forces assigned to your life right now are not ordinary angels, they are warriors of abundance. Angels of financial restoration, angels who deliver what was written for you before you were born. God says you were destined for abundance, but life tried to teach you lack. Now heaven is correcting the story. God says your bank executive is stunned not because of earthly funds, but because a heavenly decree has been manifested in a physical account. God says financial systems cannot explain divine transactions. God says the miracle you received is not measured by human calculators or budgets, it is measured by the limitless nature of God. God says when He blesses, He does not bless halfway, He blesses in overflow. God says He wants you to know the truth. This miracle is not only financial. It is spiritual. It is emotional. It is personal. It is the beginning of a new cycle in your life where you stop breaking and start building, where you stop settling and start soaring. God says this is the shift your soul has been waiting for, the shift your destiny has been aligned with, the shift your prayers have been calling forth. God says this urgent message is the key to your spiritual acceptance of the miracle. He says the reason He calls it urgent is because today is not like other days. Today is a prophetic moment, a divine appointment, a spiritual unveiling. God says something in the heavens moved, something that has never moved for you before, and it released something that has your name engraved in divine light. God says if you had not opened this message, the blessing would have still existed, but your spirit would not have connected with it. God says reading this aligns you fully with what He has poured out. God says you must understand how deeply you are loved. He says He has not been distant from you even once. He has been closer to you in your darkest moments than the people who claim to care for you. God says He walked beside you when you felt alone. He stood behind you when the world pushed against you. He lifted you when your spirit was collapsing under burdens too heavy for your shoulders. God says He does not bless you now because of what you have, but because of who you are to Him. God says the miracle money represents His promise, I will never abandon you. I will provide for you. I will elevate you. God says you are stepping into a season where you see what He has been preparing in silence. God says the reason things were quiet for so long is because major blessings are built in silence. God says you were not forgotten, you were being positioned. God says He knows there were moments you questioned Him. Moments you wondered if your prayers were hitting the ceiling. Moments where disappointment felt heavier than faith. But God says He never held that against you. He knows your heart. He knows your sincerity. He knows the strength it took just to keep going. God says today He wipes away the years of financial fear, the anxiety that lived in your chest, the stress that forced you to pretend you were okay when you were breaking inside. God says you are stepping into supernatural financial peace. The kind no one around you has ever experienced. The kind that comes only from heaven. God says this peace will transform you, elevate you, strengthen you, and allow you to walk with confidence you have never known before. God says the trillions in your name are symbolic of limitless abundance, but they are also real spiritual wealth being converted into earthly manifestation. God says expect unexpected financial opportunities. Expect sudden open doors. Expect calls, messages, meetings, and approvals that defy logic. God says you must believe deeply, because faith is the container that holds miracles. The bigger your faith, the bigger your blessing becomes. God says He is stretching your faith now, preparing you to receive more than you have ever held before. God says you are no longer living in survival mode, you are rising into divine abundance mode. God says He has removed every spirit of lack, loss, and limitation from your path. God says everything that tried to block you, drain you, delay you, confuse you, or weaken you has been defeated. God says nothing stands in your way now, not spiritually, not financially, not emotionally. God says this is your moment, your season, your divine turn. God says trust Him completely. Trust Him with every part of your life. He says nothing will go wrong with you. He says you are safe. He says angels are surrounding you. He says His hand is upon you. He says this miracle money is sealed for you. God says receive it. Believe it. And know that heaven has already moved in your favor. God says this message is being placed in front of you at this exact moment because heaven has watched every hour you have struggled, every night you have cried silently, every moment you felt forgotten, and every prayer you whispered thinking no one heard it. God says He heard all of it, and this is why this urgent message is reaching you right now. God says the miracle that has been prepared for you has finally reached the physical world, and nothing can block it anymore. God says your bank executive is stunned because what appeared in your name is not just money, it is a divine confirmation of what heaven already wrote about your destiny. God says there are blessings that were delayed, blessings that were stolen, blessings that were hidden from you, blessings that should have reached you years ago, but now everything has aligned at once, and that is why the sudden miracle money has appeared. It is not normal, it is not ordinary, it is not something the world can explain or understand. It is divine intervention, something only heaven could orchestrate. God says this is not something to take lightly, and this is why He is asking you to pay close attention. You are standing at the doorway of a breakthrough that generations before you prayed for. God says your family line carried burdens for years, but no one ever received a miracle at this level. You are the first one. You are the chosen one. This miracle is not just for you, but for the healing of your entire bloodline. God says the reason this message came urgently is because heaven is trying to protect you from missing the blessing that has already arrived spiritually and is manifesting physically. God says you will not lose anything. God says you are safe. God says nothing will go wrong with you. God says trust Him, because the miracle He placed in your name is bigger than anything you have ever seen. God says the trillions deposited in your name are not random numbers. They represent the fullness of heaven's abundance, a divine overflow meant to lift every burden you have carried. God says you have been faithful even when life was unfair. You did not curse Him even when people betrayed you. You did not stop praying even when things made no sense. You continued doing good even when others used you. You stayed pure-hearted even in a world full of manipulation. God says heaven never forgot how you behaved during your hardest seasons. Everything you did in silence has been counted. Heaven saw what humans ignored. Heaven honored what others dismissed. God says He is rewarding your hidden patience with a miracle so loud that the world will not understand how it happened. God says your bank executive was shocked because what happened cannot be explained by systems, numbers, or human logic. God says what appeared in your name is a heavenly deposit. A miracle not tied to any human source. God says no one can trace it because it came from divine provision. No one can stop it because heaven authorized it. No one can question it because it was written in your destiny long before you were born. God says this miracle money is not a coincidence. It is a sign that your life has shifted permanently into abundance, freedom, and divine overflow. God says this is why He is calling you urgently. He is not warning you out of fear. He is warning you out of love. God says do not ignore this message, because heaven is opening a gate that only stays open for a short time. God says if you delay spiritually, the enemy will try to create confusion, distraction, or fear, making you doubt what God has already prepared for you. God says do not doubt. Do not fear. Do not delay. The miracle is real. The blessing is real. The transformation is real. God says He is asking you to open this message because He wants you to receive the spiritual instructions that secure the blessing physically. God says everything is already done. You just have to align your faith. God says the enemy tried to interfere with your finances many times. He saw your potential. He saw your future. He saw your light. He saw your destiny. God says many attacks were not random, they were attempts to stop you from reaching this moment. Financial blockages were not coincidences. Delays were not coincidences. Unexpected expenses were not coincidences. People using you financially were not coincidences. God says every attempt to drain you was the enemy trying to prevent you from receiving what is coming now. But God says the enemy failed. God says He has overridden every attack. God says heaven has rewritten everything the enemy tried to damage. God says the reason the blessing is so huge is because it is not only meant to change your life, but to restore everything that was taken from you. God says there were seasons when you helped people who never returned the favor. There were times you gave your last rupee to someone in need. There were moments you sacrificed your comfort to help others. God says none of that was wasted. Heaven recorded every act of kindness you did secretly. God says this miracle deposit is a divine repayment for every unreturned kindness. God says when you sowed love, heaven planted abundance in your future. God says trust Him. God says you will not lose your miracle. God says no harm will come to you. God says you are protected. God says angels have already been assigned to guard you and the blessing connected to your name. God says even now, Archangel Michael is standing near you, shielding you from any negative force trying to approach your blessing. God says your miracle is sealed in heaven. God says what heaven seals, no power can unseal. God says open your heart and listen carefully, because there is something deeper happening than just the manifestation of money. God says this miracle is the start of a new spiritual cycle in your life. God says He is pulling you out of survival mode and placing you into divine security. You will no longer live in fear of losing anything. You will no longer struggle to pay bills. You will no longer worry about tomorrow. God says the days of financial anxiety are ending. God says miracles will become normal for you. Supernatural provision will follow you. Doors you never knocked on will open for you. Opportunities you never asked for will find you. God says this is the level of favor He is releasing. God says your mind may try to question how this is possible, but your spirit already knows that this moment is divine. God says when heaven decides something, no earthly force can stop it. God says your thoughts may be full of doubt because of everything you've gone through, but your soul recognizes this as the moment you have prayed for. God says lean into faith, not fear. God says this miracle is only the beginning. More blessings are coming. More breakthroughs are coming. More opportunities are coming. God says you were not created to struggle. You were created to shine. God says He is removing every limitation that kept you small. He is breaking every cycle that kept you trapped. He is lifting you above every situation that tried to hold you down. God says angels have gone ahead of you to prepare your path. God says everything is unfolding in your favor. God says you will be shocked by how quickly everything changes. God says the next doors will open effortlessly. God says your name is being spoken in rooms you have never entered. God says blessings will reach you from directions you never expected. God says everything that once worried you will become a testimony. God says take a deep breath because the pressure you feel is not stress, it is spiritual elevation. Your soul is adjusting to a new level of abundance. God says trust the process. You are entering a life where miracles are your new normal. God says you are safe. God says He is with you. God says nothing will go wrong with you. God says trust Him and pray, because heaven has already delivered your miracle. God says this urgent message was sent to remind you that He has not forgotten you. The miracle is real. The blessing is yours. The abundance is here. God says do not fear losing it, fear only ignoring His voice. Trust Him, and everything will unfold exactly as He planned. If you believe in God, type Amen.